tell people, read your Bible, and it's just a neat little Bible. But anyway, it's at the pages. I don't think she read it that much, which made it a good buy for me. But it's hard to find things in it sometimes, like Daniel chapter 2. All right. Now, let's see where we're at. Let me go back to this. Again, this gives you an overview of the whole book. And you can see that it's two main sections, historical and the apocalyptic visions. These are not chronological. Some of these take place during this time, and there's things that happen historically that would interlap with this. But that's the way the book is broken down. And we're going to be here in chapter 2, which starts the first parts of the prophecy. And it's prophecy, but it's in this historical part of it. But it is done as a narrative because it's Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And it really becomes the apocalyptic, the revealing, when we get down into this section here from chapter 7 and on here, 7 and on. All right, so we're going to break into the Aramaic section. And there actually will give you a place that we'll look at tonight where it says, from this point on, it's going to be in Aramaic. And it goes all the way through chapter 7. And we talked about that. Aramaic is very close to Hebrew. They're both what are called Semitic languages. There are differences, just like differences between Spain's Spanish language and Mexico's. And then you get farther over. If you've ever heard people from Portugal speak, you'd say, well, that's Spanish. But if you try to speak Spanish to them, they'd look like you don't know what you're doing. And you wouldn't, because they're not the same, even though they sound the same. Well, it's kind of close to the same thing about Aramaic. This deals with the Gentile nations, but when we get to 8 especially, we are dealing with messages for the Hebrew nations. And out of this, especially chapter 9, is God's timetable for all of history, for the rest of history. And if you understand this, that this is for the Hebrew people, then you'll understand why the book of Revelation, after the letters are written to the churches, is for the Hebrew people. We're in on that. We understand it. We hear it. But we're not going to be here. The church is going to be raptured out. We will not go through the tribulation. And that part is in there for the Israelites who are believers, and they're looking for their Messiah. So many of them will become believers when they see the Antichrist come into power. And so Daniel 9 contains what is fully revealed in the book of Revelation. But the 70th week of Daniel that we'll look at extensively is the book of Revelation. And it's a Jewish Hebrew thing. Christians see it, we should study it, we should understand it, but it's the same thing as looking at the temple. There's a lot of things we can apply, a lot of things we can understand, but we're never going to go to the temple. That's for the Jewish people. And we are not part of that. We are the church, and they are the nation. All right, so we'll come back to that. All right, now let me get past this. All right, so here we are. Now, again, partly because of my voice, but also because I just like hearing Alexander Scorby, we're going to let him read chapter 2 for us.
Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, The thing is gone from you. If ye will not make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if ye show the dream, and the interpretation thereof, ye shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream, and the interpretation thereof. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. The king answered and said, I know of certainty that ye would gain the time, because ye see the thing is gone from me. But if ye will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. For ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that ye can show me the interpretation thereof. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, There is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asked such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain. And they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree so hasty from the king? Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house, and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God for ever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee. For thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. Therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, Destroy not the wise men of Babylon, bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet, part of iron, and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Forasmuch as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face, and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel, and said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldest reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king.
Okay. All right, so I, again, big fan of Alexander Scourby. I just think that's the way it should be read. This is our outline from last week, and I just want you to notice this is where we're going to be at right here. And this is the section that deals with the nations of the earth, who they are, their characters, relationship, all of that's going to be in chapter 2, all the way through chapter 7. And chapter 2 and chapter 7 are the same revelation, but two different kinds of visions. One is Nebuchadnezzar's vision of this image of gold. The other one, Daniel dreams, and it bothers him a lot, and he sees different animals. And then when we get to the book of Revelation, again, it's animals that John sees. But chapter 2 and chapter 7 are actually the same revelation, just different visions. There's more detail in chapter 7, and we'll get to it, I think, next week. All right, so the other things that are here, I'm just going to, because we want to keep in mind, we're just going to be looking at the prophetic things of Daniel. So in chapter 3, that's Nebuchadnezzar's trial of the confession of faith, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We have Nebuchadnezzar's vision, where he sees a tree that's cut down, and he is brought down, made to live like an animal, showing that God is in charge of even Nebuchadnezzar. Then we jump all the way to the end of the kingdom. There's many years in between this. Belshazzar, not to be confused with Belteshazzar, is actually Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, and I have to look, but maybe his great-grandson. But it says in the Bible his son, and it does that because it just means of his lineage. He's in the line of the kings. And actually, Belshazzar's father was out fighting when the Media Persians cut them off and came and took over the kingdom. That's where you see the writing on the wall. And then we come to Darius the Mede. We come to the Daniel the Lion's Den. And then chapter 7 is the end of the prophetic section for us in this part of it. And that's the image of the four beasts, the Ancient of Days, and the Son of Man. More details. And again, Daniel is the book in which the Lord really begins to reveal things that have only been hinted out with just a phrase or two in other places. But now suddenly we have entire visions, we have entire narratives, and Israel is no longer in their land, and they're having to deal with these Gentile things. And the main purpose of prophecy is not to tell us exactly what's going to happen, nor was it to tell Daniel exactly what was going to happen, or it wouldn't have been visions. It's to tell that God is in charge. God's taking care of his people. And as we progress throughout the years, more revelation is given, we understand more, and therefore we can see how God has worked. And as he's taking care of them, he will take care of us as well. All right, so this is, again, kind of just keeping you in mind of where Daniel fits in. This is the Neo-Babylonian Empire. There was a Babylonian Empire much earlier than this. It went out of existence. I think the Assyrians, or the Syrians, I think it was the Syrians, captured them. They came back. So this is the second time that the Babylonians have risen to power. The man who led that was Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar. I thought Nebuchadnezzar was hard to say. And then you have, here's Belshazzar. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. And these two were ruling at the same time. This is his dad, and this is him. He's in the kingdom, the palace, when it falls. So there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So six generations between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. And then we come to the Medo-Persian Empire, which overtakes this. And this becomes one of the greatest empires that ever ruled. For a while there, it looked like the whole world was going to be underneath their control, and it came very close. And so this is Babylon. This is where the Jewish exiles were at. And here are the different people: Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, Zedekiah. This is the book of Jeremiah. This is the book of Ezekiel. And Daniel, of course, writes later, but he's living through this time when he goes early at the same time that Ezekiel goes. He goes a little earlier. And then this is where they come back. So they leave under the Babylonian Empire. They come back under the Medo-Persian Empire. And Zerubbabel is their king. He's a descendant of David. Really, he's their governor, given permission to rule there, but he's of that royal line. And then we have Zechariah, we have Haggai. And if you're reading your chronological Bible readings this week, you finished Malachi and jumped in the New Testament. It's like, wow, this is a big difference. Suddenly we're reading things and studying things that have a whole different flavor to them. And so we'll be in the New Testament from here on out. I'm ready to preach some New Testament passages. All right, so now go back to chapter 2. We're not going to read all this over again because it is a long passage. But you remember what happened. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It's the second year of his reign. And he has this dream, and then he goes and sends for these people, the sorcerers, the astrologers, and the Chaldeans, the magicians. He says, okay, I had a dream, but I've forgotten it. So tell me the dream, and then tell me the interpretation. And if you think that sounds like a trap, then yeah, you're right. It's obviously a trap. One of the things he says, well, first let's do what I have up here. Who are these people? So magicians, these are those who work through words or chants or enchantments. So they had this belief that by saying certain things, certain ways, just like you would think of a magician in our modern ideas, this is what they did. They would chant, they would say things, and they thought by the power of that they could change events or change the physical world around them. Then we have the astrologers. We still have those with us today. They study the stars, and they believe that the stars influence people. And it wasn't so much influence individual stars as constellations. And as a certain planet moved through a certain constellation, things could happen. And we still have astrological charts and reading horoscopes. And there are people who are just absolutely convinced it has an influence on their life. I was working with working on the side, going to church too. And I am tired. Anyway, had a girl who would always read her horoscope and ask everybody, "Do you read your horoscope?" And I said, "You don't really believe that?" And she said, "Oh yeah, it always fits." And I said, "Well, that's really interesting." We had a stack of old newspapers from months back, and so I reached down without her knowing, pulled it out from months ago, and read, "Is this your horoscope?" I read it. She said, "Wow, that's amazing. That actually happened today." So, well, what's really amazing is that's a month-old newspaper. So it'll fit any day, any time, any place. Astrology is not astronomy. It's nothing. It's a joke. Sorcerers. These are people who work through potions. The word is taken from a Hebrew word which means to cut or to mix. In the Greek, when we get into the words that Paul condemns, and he says sorcerers, he uses the word for pharmacy. And this is what they did. They mixed drugs. They made drugs. And so they did their kind of magic by mixing things and having potions and love potions and whatever else. And then we have the Chaldeans, and that's a term that's applied to all the wise men of Babylon. Now, they were all Chaldeans. That area was Chaldea. But it became a term which meant these Chaldeans, they were the wise men. And I think, and there's others who believe this as well, when the wise men came on Jesus' birth, or shortly after his birth, they were Chaldeans. They had Daniel's prophecy. And so they saw the star. They said, "What does this mean?" They had their astrologers. It must be some big sign. They went back and saw the prophecies. Here's Daniel, one of their greatest wise men, and he actually gives an exact time in which the Messiah would come, born King of the Jews. And so they come from the east. That's exactly where Babylon would have been. And so they come, and I believe the wise men were Chaldeans. All right, so secondly, why is Nebuchadnezzar making such a demand? It is a test. He's trying to see if they're really wise men or authentic. And then he adds this phrase, to see if ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time be changed. He's kind of like challenging them in the same way that I did with the horoscope. He's saying, if I tell you, then you can change it. You can make it say whatever you want to. You can give me some application that has, or interpretation that has nothing to do with what actually is going to happen. But as the times change, you're going to change your interpretation. So it was a test. It's debatable whether he forgot. I don't think he forgot. I think it was strictly, absolutely a test because of what he says here. You've prepared lying and corrupt words. He doesn't trust them. They were a power base unto themselves. We find out later on that they dislike Daniel because their power has been diminished by Nebuchadnezzar in favor of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. All right. So this is the vision, and this is the interpretation over here. So he says, the image's head was of fine gold, and then he tells Nebuchadnezzar, thou art this head of gold. His breast and his arms are of silver. After thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. His belly and his thighs are brass, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. His legs of iron, part clay. The fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, break them to pieces. And here's the interpretation. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to another people. That means there's not going to be a kingdom that comes after this, but it shall break in pieces, consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. There's a lot here to touch base on. Just a couple of main points so that you understand. When he says, thou art this head of gold, it is Nebuchadnezzar. And if you look at it from the standpoint of who Nebuchadnezzar was, how much power he had, he was the gold standard, to use that phrase. What he said went, period. He didn't confer with anybody. He could condemn a person to death. He could do like he did with Daniel and raise him to honor. And he didn't go to anybody. He wasn't required to do anything except just say it. So he was gold. He had pure authority. When we get down to the next kingdom down here, let me bring this up, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. This is the empire that takes the Babylonian Empire 6 generations later. If you read, just like we did the book of Esther, they now have to be beholden to whatever law they wrote down, because you can't change the law of the Medes and the Persians. And so when Mordecai the Jews were condemned, he couldn't say, no, never mind, we're not going to do that. He could say, you're allowed to defend yourself. And so what happens, Nebuchadnezzar could have said, forget that. You're not going to do that to the Jews. But the Persians couldn't do that because the law had been written down. They are inferior to the law now. Even though they may have made the law, they were now inferior and beholden to it. Nebuchadnezzar was not. So that's what most people think this idea of gold and silver means. We get down to the Grecian Empire. This is Alexander the Great. Great empire takes over the world under Alexander. They fight back the Medo-Persians, stop them from going into the Western civilizations. And where the main difference with that, not so much Alexander, but with the Grecian states, where's the birth of democracy, the birth of republican states? Where did that come from? From Greece. Athens and Sparta and those places, they had republican representation. They would elect assemblies. That's where we get our word ecclesia, which means an assembly called together to do city business. And they would elect leaders, and these leaders would have rule over that city-state. And so these people are beholden to the other people. And so they're even less powerful and authoritative than the silver, the Medo-Persians, and certainly much less than Nebuchadnezzar. Then we get down to the Roman Empire, who took their lessons from the Grecian Empire, And they are really the birth of true republicanism. They had a Congress, they had a Senate. Uh, in the beginning, their emperors were elected as by the Senate. They weren't as pure a democracy in that sense as we are. Only certain people could vote. You had to have certain nobility, own certain property. But they are republics. And that is, again, far superior, far inferior to the power that Nebuchadnezzar had. With just a decree, he could change anything he wanted to. Not down here. Even after the republic fell to the emperors, there was still a requirement for the Senate. They never outlawed the Senate. And they had to deal with the Senate. They had to deal with the people. They had to deal with what they called the mob. And so again, it's not nearly as authoritarian. It's not gold. It's iron. But it's very powerful. The most powerful empire, really in some ways, influenced the world more than any of the other empires. There were bigger ones, but none of them had the influence and the lasting power of the Roman Empire. And then we come down here. They're calling it the Holy Roman Empire. I don't want so much to worry about that. We're going to call it the revived Roman Empire. And it's going to come about in the time of these 10 kings. And that's the 10 toes. When it says, whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay is pottery. And so what he's saying is you've got iron, which is real hard, and then you've got this pottery that's been fired, and it's brittle. It's hard, but it's going to break. And this is, he says, the kings during this time are mixing and mingling themselves with the clay. The clay is us. The clay is common people. And so these 10 kings, are having to work with and having to derive their power. So it's even less powerful than this, and it's very brittle. It's ready to blow up, as many cities and states and republics are today. But it'll be more so during that time of the 10-toed kings, or the 10-toed kingdoms. And again, we'll look at this in more detail. Then he says, and you saw until a stone cut without hands struck at the feet and destroyed it. And it says, you get the picture that it just so destroyed it, and in a sense rolled back and forth until it was just nothing but dust. It was just like chaff in the wind, so that they could never be reconstructed, never could come back to power. And that was, it said, and then the stone became a great mountain and a great kingdom, and there would be no other people after this. So we know that's the kingdom of Christ. That's what happens at the end of the book of Revelation, when the millennium starts. Again, it's a Jewish time. And so this is the vision. And so what's laid out for us is all the kingdoms of the Gentiles from the time of Nebuchadnezzar until the time of the Romans, and then the revived Roman Empire that will come in. It's not here now. Some people used to think it was the European common market. It was a good idea until there was more than 10. And I don't know how many are in the common market now. But and maybe that'll drop back down. It may still be, but you can't guess at it that way. And we don't know when, but just waiting for 10 people to join or nations to join the European common market was not the signal. We know that now. It may drop back down to it. It may change. It may be something different, but it will be drawn from the old Roman provinces, the old Roman states, which went from Germany down to India, all the way to England, conquered the Persians. It didn't go that far east. I can't remember where it stopped, but Croatia, Romania, all those things were underneath there. So those will be the revived Roman Empire, one way or the other. Now, this is, well, I'm going to print this chart out, and you'll have this in your notes next week. Here's Nebuchadnezzar's dream: the head, the breast, the belly, the thighs, and we'll just fill this in like you saw on the earlier one today. Here's the fulfillment of it. These are the world powers: Neo-Babylonian, Medo-Persia, Greece, Roman in 3 periods, the ancient Roman, the Roman-derived governments, which will be the revived Roman Empire, and then ultimately the Antichrist, who takes over those 10 kingdoms. That hasn't been revealed. It will be revealed in the next vision that he has in chapter 7. And then here is the chapter 7 vision, and again, he sees these visions, these things: a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a beast that is diverse from all the others. And it's in that the Roman Empire is found. Then he sees these 10 horns, and then amongst those 10 horns, instead of 10 toes, he sees a little horn that raises itself up and takes power from the 10. And that's where we first hear about the Antichrist. Again, all of this is going to be further explained in the book of Revelation. And then this is the end of that. God's indestructible kingdom comes and destroys the image. Here is the Messianic kingdom. Here's Christ as the king. And here he is as the stone. Over here, the Ancient of Days sets up that kingdom. That's God on his throne. And the Son of Man, which is, of course, Christ, who gives dominion or takes dominion over those things. All right, and this is Daniel chapter 7, an artist's conception of it. So this winged lion, that's gold. The bear with 3 ribs in its mouth, that's Medo-Persia. The 4-winged leopard with the 3 heads, 3 or 4 heads, anyway, that's the brass. And the iron is the beast with the 10 horns, ultimately. And you can see here's the image that corresponds with that. So chapter 2, chapter 7. And then the final result of all this that happened, and it brings us back to history and takes us away from prophecy, is that Nebuchadnezzar bows down. The Bible says he worships him. The word worship in its strictest form just means to bow down. I don't think he looked upon him as a god, but he does tremendous service or honor to him by bowing before a common man. I mean, he's the king. He's the head of gold. And yet he bows down before him. The Bible says he worships him. He made sacrifice. He says he calls for oblation and sacrifices to be given to Daniel. He confesses the superiority of Daniel's God. This is going to happen here. It's going to happen again in chapter 5 when he raises himself up and says, look at what I've done. And God says, wait, don't you remember what I told you in the dream I gave you? I made you that king of gold. And now you're saying you did that. So he strikes him down. He becomes a beast for 7 years. And then he brings him back, and he really honors the Lord at that point. He makes Daniel rich. He makes him a great man. He makes him a ruler of all the wise men of Babylon. And then Daniel, of course, requests for his friends to be promoted. And that's why when we come to Daniel 3 and the image that they will not bow down to, that's why they're pointed out. Those other men say, here are these guys. They've been promoted. They're outsiders. They came from a different country. Now they're ruling over us. So that's why they're pointed out and said, Nebuchadnezzar, didn't you say this should happen? They didn't, and they have to take a stand. So after they're promoted, the Bible makes this statement in the last part of the verse. He sits in the gate. So he puts Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. I'm going to get all those down. He puts them in different areas, different provinces, but the Bible says he sits in the king's gate. What that means is he becomes a personal advisor to the king, or in this very close personal council, kind of like the president's cabinet. I don't think he was the only one that was there, because he wasn't in charge of the military or anything like that, but he was there for at least the spiritual things, anything else that might arise like this. And Nebuchadnezzar learned to trust him. So they're out there doing that, puts them as on the front line, makes them targets. Daniel becomes a target in at Daniel lion's den under Darius the Mede, and but he is sitting as the personal counselor to Nebuchadnezzar. That's how great that was. And there's another picture of that image, not as clear, but you can get the idea. That one looks like it's all gold. So this is one of the key passages. If you're going to study prophecy, you got to start in Daniel. And a lot of people don't. They bypass Daniel, jump right into Revelation, and come up with some really wild ideas. But you have to start here. That's where God started. And then you have to progress. And chapter 9 is the key for all of biblical prophecy. And we're not going to study Revelation again. We've done that several times. But we will lay the parallels between Daniel chapter 9 and the book of Revelation side by side so we can see them again. And it'll add tremendously to your understanding of the Bible, your understanding of prophecy. Always keeping in mind, it's not so you can know who the Antichrist is. I don't think it's going to be an American. I don't know how many people said it was Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama. Oh gosh, name it. I mean, it's been out there. Henry Kissinger was a fun one, wasn't it? Yeah, because he was actually German or something. And recently, it's been very popular to say that the Antichrist is going to be a Muslim man, that he's going to be Erdogan of Turkey, that this guy's got so much power. And I listen to him and I say, wait, he has to be somebody back there that fits into this description. And the Jewish people have to think he's their Messiah. You think they're going to accept a Muslim as their Messiah? I don't think so. But there's a lot of different ideas out there. If you start with Daniel and you use it as the basis for all the rest of the understanding of prophecy, you're going to understand why we believe that the church will not go through the tribulation, because it's the Jewish people that in Daniel are said, these things have to happen so that your people can be brought back to me. And one of the things that's mentioned, the time of Jacob's trouble, exactly what the book of Revelation is about. And so we don't need to, if you're a Christian, you don't need to be brought back to God. I mean, individually, yes, but as Christians, we are redeemed. We understand what Christ is, who Christ is, what he's done for us. But the nation of Israel to this day does not. They still do not understand Jesus is their Messiah. And so the tribulation will finally bring them to that place. It seals up the visions. It makes an end to sin. There's like 7 things that Daniel or Gabriel tells Daniel. These things will happen. Here's how they're going to happen. And then God's people will be, once again, God's people, and they'll understand who their Messiah really was. And so it's a Jewish vision, and we have the privilege of looking into it, but it's for the Jewish people, and we will not be going through that. Pray for them, but you and I will not be involved with that part of it. All right, any questions, comments on this? Again, this is just a very quick introduction. I meant for it to be even quicker than this. We'll come back and pick up